We got some unfortunate news a couple days back regarding our superstar Maxx Crosby, who is out for the rest of the season with an ankle injury. He's going to have surgery, and his season is officially over. And we're going to talk about this. Plus, we got a couple other updates I kind of want to just get into. The Raiders obviously have a game tonight on Monday Night Football against the Atlanta Falcons. Let's just get right into this, man. So, Maxx Crosby went out there and actually posted this entire thing on his Twitter, and he talked a little bit about exactly what had happened. And within this post, he put it out there that this is the second time he's essentially had an ankle injury. Right, earlier on, it was against the Baltimore Ravens. He got rolled up, had a high ankle sprain. He fought through it. He wanted to play this season. We know the type of person Maxx Crosby is, right? This guy does not quit. He's not going down. And unfortunately, this past week, he once again got cut blocked, and apparently that led to another ankle injury. And at this point, Maxx Crosby has decided that it makes the most sense for him to just go ahead and have surgery. And I agree with this, right? Let's just be honest. Maxx Crosby, if he really wants to play, can play the next 4 to 5 games. Right? Realistically, he can play every game for the rest of the season if he really, really, really wanted to. But he's not going to be 100%. He risks his long-term health as well. And to me, it just doesn't make sense for him, right? It also slows down the process for the offseason, right? And I think that's the big one. And I think that's why he's ultimately choosing to get this surgery. So if Maxx Crosby goes out and gets the surgery, let's say in the next week, he'll recover for about 5 to 6 weeks. The season ends. And then at that point, he's ready to start that offseason program. He's ready to start getting right for next year. Now, let's just be honest, man. This Raiders team is a good football team. I don't care what anybody says. Our coaching sucks. Our quarterback sucks. But outside of that, we have a lot of really, really solid pieces. Now, we do have to add a couple other pieces, right? Like, you got to get a good running back. But you have pieces. You have Brock Bowers, arguably the best tight end in the NFL. Michael Mayer is arguably better than most tight ends on half the NFL rosters, right? Guys that are starting. So the Raiders have 2 solid tight ends, but we also have Jacoby Myers. We also have Trey Tucker, who's a pretty good football player. Sincere McCormick has looked really, really good. And I think, when you pair up all the guys you have on the offense side of the football, Jackson Powers-Johnson's a top 5 center already. Colt Miller, top 10 to 15 tackle. The Raiders have pieces on the offense side of the football. But we are missing a coach, and I think for the Raiders, the best thing you can do right now is make sure that the guys on this team are fully healthy going into next season. Right? Any game at this point is a meaningless win. Right? Any game the Raiders win is a meaningless win for the Raiders at this point. But with Maxx Crosby essentially getting this surgery, I think this just makes a ton of sense for him to kind of start that offseason, kind of get forward. And, some people are even going to say that the Raiders are basically tanking at this point. They're just trying to lose every single one of these games. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. And there's a couple of reasons why. So first and foremost, the Raiders are expected to start Desmond Ridder, right? So Adam Schefter has now officially put it out there. He said that the Raiders quarterback Desmond Ridder is expected to start tonight versus the Falcons. The Raiders, Aiden O'Connell is listed as questionable and is expected to work out pre-game to see if he can play, but Ridder is expected to start for now. I'm not surprised. I already talked about this in my video just a couple days ago. Aiden O'Connell is not going to play for the Raiders, right? I would be very, very surprised to see Aiden O'Connell play at all the rest of the season. And I know he's expected to work out, but I just don't think it's going to happen. In fact, I think we're going to see not only Desmond Ridder the rest of the season, I think we'll actually see Carter Bradley a little bit as well. And that's something that I actually am kind of more so hoping to actually see happen. I just want to see what this guy looks like out there. But we're also going to end up getting Desmond Ridder against the Falcons. And this is interesting because Ridder was drafted by the Falcons, right? So we'll see what ends up happening this game. But I think a lot of people at this point are going to say that any win is super, super meaningless. And to take it a step further, earlier today, we actually got some pretty important news that I think impacts the Raiders. And that is that Penn State quarterback Drew Allar officially informed the school's coaching staff that he planned to return for essentially his final year in college. So we're at the point where, the quarterback class, we're losing these quarterbacks. These quarterbacks are not deciding to come out. Miller Moss obviously ended up getting benched, and he transferred, so he's obviously decided not to come out. But he was a guy that some people were kind of high on, including me. Drew Allar was another guy I was very, very, very high on. And in fact, over the last couple of weeks, we've been hearing that Drew Allar is arguably the best quarterback had he came out this year. He had been arguably the number 1 overall pick. And he's deciding to go back to school. And I think it makes sense, right? And even if he wasn't the number 1 overall pick, he would have been one of the top 3 quarterbacks taken, right? So he would have probably been a top 10 pick regardless. But him going back to school also means that he can come back next year and potentially actually be the number 1 overall pick, right? But this quarterback class is taking huge hits at the quarterback position. And I think when you're the Raiders, you really got to consider your future, because if the Raiders can get a quarterback in the first round, if the Raiders coming in the second round can get a running back, there's 3 running backs this year that are first round caliber running backs. You got Caleb Johnson, you got Amari and Hampton from UNC. Those 2 guys have already declared, and then you got Ashton Genty as well. I think Genty will come out as well. I don't know if he's officially declared, but he's going to come out as well. You got 3 guys that are first round picks, and not all 3 of them will actually go in the first round, right? Having a first round grade at the running back position means you're not going to go in the first round. Not all the time, at least. The Raiders can come out of this class with a quarterback, a running back, and that basically sets up your offense to potentially have a lot of success. Added all the other guys, right? So at this point, the Raiders really got to hit on that quarterback, because some people are saying there's probably not even, outside of Cam Ward, people are saying there's probably not another quarterback that has a first round grade. And remember, grade doesn't mean you won't go in the first round, right? We saw guys like J.J. McCarthy going in the first round last year, right? And some people are like, that guy's not a first round quarterback. Michael Penix was another guy that won in the first round. People are like, that guy's not a first round grade of a quarterback. So we're at the point now where, Maxx Crosby's out, and some people are saying, hey, that's probably because the Raiders are trying to tank. Christian Wilkins obviously had an injury earlier on, and I think he was technically put on the short-term injured reserve, so he should theoretically be back at this point. And people are saying he's not expected to play at all for the Raiders either going forward. And I think that makes sense as well, right? Christian Wilkins looked really, really good during his time with the Raiders, which is kind of crazy that some people don't think that he was actually worth the money that the Raiders paid him. Christian Wilkins looked really, really, really good for the Raiders in the time that he did play. And I think for the Raiders, you have a top 5 defensive tackle. You have a top 5 defensive end, right? A true number 1 D tackle, number 1 D end. We'll get these guys healthy going into next year. The Raiders will be able to have success, but we got to get a quarterback. We got to get a running back. And even the offensive line, maybe you get a guard in like the 3rd or 4th round. Maybe you add a corner. Maybe you add a safety. I think the Raiders are in a really, really good spot as we kind of go forward. But we do got to get a quarterback. Now, some people have been saying that it'd be smart for the Raiders to potentially go out and maybe not take a quarterback in the first, right? Like, let's say the Raiders win 1 more game. We're picking with the 7th overall pick, essentially. With just 1 win. We dropped down from the, number 1, number 2 spot down to 7. And people are saying that even if you have a top 3 or 4 pick, it might not be smart to take the second quarterback in this class. And if that's the case, right, if you don't take the second quarterback, whoever that ends up being, would it be smarter for the Raiders to say, hey, let's wait for a guy like Jackson Dart or Dylan Gabriel? Like, maybe we can get these guys in the second round, right? Let's take Travis Hunter instead, right, who won the Heisman Trophy just a couple days ago. Would it make sense to take Travis Hunter? Would it make sense to take one of these other guys? Right, maybe it's a tackle or not, maybe it's a safety in Malachi Starks. Would it make sense to add the best player available, which is a strategy that obviously worked for Tom Telesco last year? He took the best tight end, he took the best center, and probably the best players just overall on the board at the time the Raiders were picking, and it's worked out. The Raiders got a top 5 tight end and a top 5 center. Would it be smart for the Raiders to take the best player approach once again, and then maybe you come back, if Jalen Monroe is still there in the second round, or Jackson Dart or Dylan Gabriel? Now, those guys could theoretically also end up going back to school. At least Jalen Monroe can. Would it be smart for these guys to potentially go back, right? We're going to find out, right? We'll find out. There's another quarterback that a coach is a very, very smart coach. He's actually the director of the Hula Bowl. His name's Scott Phillips. This guy's very high on Brady Cook, which is another target for the Raiders, maybe in like the 2nd round, 3rd round, depending on, where teams kind of value him. In fact, I did a breakdown with Coach Scott Phillips, just kind of talking about Brady Cook and what his thoughts and opinions are of him. I'll put a link down in the comments below. You guys can go check that out if you guys are interested in that. Brady Cook's another guy, right? These are guys that, like, with Jackson Dart, with Jalen Monroe, with Brady Cook, they might not it's not eye-popping, right? But these guys all played in the SEC. They have that experience at, playing in that highest conference. They have that experience going up against some of the best competition. And these guys have won football games, right? Like, you can't overlook the fact that Alabama and Ole Miss, Missouri, these teams are having success, right? And I almost think teams look at guys like, Brock Purdy, who went to Iowa, and he didn't have a great career, right? Like in college, but he's translating into the NFL. And a part of that is because of essentially the coach, right? So don't overlook the fact that the Raiders might even take that approach, especially with Tom Brady, who might feel like, hey, you can get a quarterback in round 5, 6, or 7, right? But you just got to have a coaching staff in place that could maybe get these guys to have success. The worst case scenario for the Raiders as we go into this next season is the Raiders roll forward with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell for another year. Right? That'd be the worst case scenario. But Gardner Minshew is technically under contract, as is Aiden O'Connell. So we'll see what ends up happening. I hope they do end up getting a quarterback, but I hope they don't also reach for a quarterback, because the Tennessee Titans are a great example of this. The Tennessee Titans took Will Levis in the 2nd round. Luckily, they didn't take him with the top 10 pick, but they took him in the 2nd round. And they invested in Will Levis, and not only was he the quarterback last year, but they said, we're going to give him one more year, right? Essentially a 2nd year to prove himself. And, his career is kind of up and down a little bit, and I think a lot of fans are out on Will Levis at this point. And I'm not sure if the Titans are, but if they are out on Will Levis, the unfortunate thing with Will Levis is, the Titans aren't picking in the top 10, right? They're not going to get one of these quarterbacks. So you're either going to reach for another quarterback if you do decide to go to quarterback, or you have to look at the free agency market. You go and get a backup quarterback. You're going to have to go down from one of these other routes. And, the Titans are in a really, really, really bad place with the quarterback. And that's because they picked the wrong quarterback, right? And I think for the Raiders, the best thing the Raiders can do right now is not reach for a quarterback that should not go where he's going to ultimately go. Right now, everybody's like, Shedeur Sanders is the best quarterback. Some people are saying Cam Ward's the best quarterback. We even have people saying Jalen Monroe might go in the top 10. Now, we don't really know which quarterback is being valued where. You never really know until the draft actually gets a lot closer, because teams are not in the business of putting their opinions out there, right? So we don't really know which quarterback's going to go high and which quarterback's not. Even saying Shedeur Sanders is the best quarterback in this class, everyone's guessing at this point. We don't really know what NFL teams are actually thinking. So I think as time kind of goes on, we're going to actually find out which quarterback teams are actually going to say, hey, we're willing to take this guy in the top 10 or whatever it is. I suspect we're going to have one quarterback that will 100% go with the number 1 overall pick. I think he'll be the consensus guy. I think it's going to be Cam Ward, based off of everything I've heard from people a lot smarter than me, as well as, just watching the tape between Ward and some of the other guys. But I also don't think Shedeur Sanders won't be a top 10 pick. I think some team's going to still end up taking him. And I think he can still develop into a really, really good quarterback. I think the situation these guys all end up going into is going to have a big impact on kind of how they turn out. Right? You get paired up with Mike McDaniel, you're going to have a lot more success than if you get paired up with Josh McDaniels. Right? It's just what it is. Right? Let me know what you guys think, man. The Raiders look to obviously be taking at this point. Maxx Crosby is obviously out. A lot of quarterbacks are going to be end up going back to school. We'll see what ends up happening, man. The Raiders at this point, might have to have the 1st overall pick in order to be able to get that quarterback. And it almost seems like the Giants and Raiders are both, they're getting ready to basically tank the rest of the season, right? Don't win any more games, lose out, and hope you get the number 1 overall pick. We'll see what ends up happening, man. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time with another video.